welcome to the Dropship Podcast. Your boy's back. COVID, it was all right. 1 star probably I would give it. It wasn't very fun, but I'm glad to be back here recording. Sorry if I hack along off to the side here in the middle of the show, but I'm glad to be back, John. I'm glad to be back. Today we want to talk about how to get rid of the beginner's fear, how to just start, how to, as Gary Vee would say, kiss the girl.
Yeah, man. And look, everybody has fears around business, starting something new, doing something challenging, whatever it is. I think a lot of people know they have those fears. Maybe some people don't quite realize the impact those things have. But I think we hear this a lot, right? A lot of people ask this sort of question, like, how do you move past the fear? And your fear could be of numerous different things, but how do you move past? How do you deal with that? How do you just get started anyway when you have that going on in your head? And it's a good question. I think about this one a lot, and I think it's important to recognize, as we do in the beginning, like, we all have fears. Do you know what I mean? Like, I still have fears, various fears, like, all of that sort of thing. Even when you hit some of your milestones, the success milestones that you thought you had in the beginning, you still carry a lot of that mental garbage around with you. I wouldn't even say it's garbage, because it's completely normal to have those sort of fears. So I think that's probably the first step, is if you think you're experiencing that, then don't beat yourself up about it. It's pretty normal to have those sort of fears.
But what is fear, right? Fear is just a lack of preparedness. And so if you're about to jump into something new, I bet you're feeling lack of being prepared jumping into something new, right? And so this is your sign to come join a course or a mentorship or go watch a bunch of videos to get prepared. And so I was victim of that. I want to say I started researching how to make money online-ish, something along that, of like July. And I didn't buy any course until January of the next year. And that was only because they actually raised their price and I didn't believe them. So when they did, and then they ran a real quick sale, I was like, I'm going to jump all over this, right? And so I was feeling a lack of being prepared. And then even then, my next step in the business was to actually call suppliers. And I put that off as far as I could, again, because I felt a lack of preparedness. I didn't feel prepared to make these calls. Who am I? I had a lot of imposter syndrome going on. And so anything you can do to fill that void of lack of preparedness is going to take you over that fear, or at least bring you close enough to it where you're like, I can jump over this little puddle rather than feeling like it's this giant gorge.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I think a big part of it is that you don't know what's going to happen. Right. Or, so you're going around in your head, like, and your brain or your subconscious or whatever just builds things up bigger and bigger because you don't know. And there's all these possibilities and you don't know what's going to happen. And so you worry about it more and more and more. And that in turn holds you back from starting more and more and more. So I think part of the way of dealing with those sort of fears or things going on in your head is to, is to step through some of that stuff in your mind. So I think there's some mental exercises whenever you're experiencing fear, and not just of business, of anything in life, like you say, like calling suppliers, or maybe going and doing a new thing, or talking to someone at a bar, like whatever it is, right? I think there's a series of steps you can go through, and a couple of exercises we can talk about here to help give you a sense of that thing, doing that thing, whatever it is less overwhelming than it probably feels like. And so you can bring down, like I say, I don't think you can ever get rid of fear, right? It's a very human thing. There's a reason we feel fear, from an evolutionary perspective, right? It's a very important thing for us to have. And it's not going to go away. But what you can do, because it's baked into who you are, right? It's baked into being a organism on Earth. Other animals experience fear as well, right? Because it's what kicks them into action at particular times. So it's never going to go away, but you can manage it. You can manage it so that it's not so much of a barrier, and it's not something that holds you back as much as a person as if you just let it kind of run rampant within your mind. And so I think we can talk through some sort of exercises. And these are things that I think personally I do. Ben, I'm assuming you do some of these things as well.
I'm not a huge fan of some of it, just like I have this belief first off, what you resist persists, right? And also what you focus on grows. And so I do have this like innate fear of like, stoicism's a good example. Stoicism wants you to like go sit in the world, like go imagine your family getting murdered and then go live the rest of your day. And I'm like, number one, I could see how that would help. Honestly, if you imagine that every morning, you probably like want to run through a wall, right? But also like, isn't that like the point of visualization is you go visualize the future you want and then bring it to you? So like, I don't know if I want to be visualizing that awful stuff. That's I'm a little torn on it, but I definitely have done it. Not to the extent of stoicism, because that to me, I just haven't got there yet. I don't know.
Yeah. I think,
Ryan Holiday, come convince me, man.
Oh yeah. Dude's a legend. I love his stuff.
Yeah.
And I love all that. But I think the difference here is that, that example of say something horrible happening to your family or something, that's not something that you're doing, right? That's just something that could happen to you, which you have no control over, right? And a whole part of stoicism is, realizing that there's things that you control and there's things that you don't control. And so, there's a whole thing around that. In the sense of fears here, what I think we're really talking about is fears of you've got fear about something that you are going to do that you're in full control of. So if we're talking about starting a dropshipping business, that's
or
something you're going to go out and do rather than something that's going to happen to you, potentially happen to you. And so I think how you deal with, and so you can have fear around both of those things. You can have fear that, yes, the sky's going to fall in tomorrow, an asteroid's going to hit Earth, blah, 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 but you have no control over those things. So yes, you could go through exercises to deal with those and to deal with your fear about those things. But I think it's different when it's something that you're going to do because you are in complete control of your actions there. And so you can step out what's going to happen if you do those things or if you don't do those things. And so I think that's kind of a different, I think how you deal with those fears is different. So it's a little bit different, but anyway, so one of the exercises I like to go through, let's just jump into this, Ben. Let's give some meat to the bones here, right? So one of the things I like to do personally is to go through a series of what if questions, right? So if I'm sitting there going, oh, I'm really worried about starting a business, a high ticket dropshipping business, and let's say I'm afraid of failing at that, or at least the assumption of what failing is, right? So I'm going to try and do this thing and it's not going to work. I'm going to fall flat on my face with it. I'm going to start a business. What if I make no sales, right? Like I'm going to make no sales. I'm going to feel like I failed, etc. So the exercise that I go through there to sort of help me deal with that fear is to ask the question, what if, right? And so start with the base fear. Okay, so I'm worried about this business failing. So, okay, so what if this business fails? What's going to happen? Well, the answer to that might be, well, I spent a little bit of money starting it, so I'm not going to get that money back. I'm going to lose, like, I wouldn't say you would lose, but I'm not going to have that money anymore. Okay, so what if you don't have that money anymore? Right? What's going to happen then? Well, in the case of a high-ticket dropshipping business, as we've said on this podcast, I'm probably going to spend less than $500 starting it. So I'm going to miss out on $500, having that money in my bank account. Okay, so what is that going to mean to you? Now, if I ask that question of myself, at least, and the answer is going to be different for everybody, I would probably say, even when I started my first business, well, that's not really going to have any impact on me. Financially, I'm not going to be broke. I'm not going to have to declare bankruptcy. And I can make that money back in a job. I can work a job and make $500 pretty quickly, right? So I'm not actually going to be any worse off at all, right? Another answer of the what if question might be, well, I'll have spent a certain number of hours, a certain amount of my time doing something. And so what if it doesn't work? Well, I lost that time, but I've got lots of time left, right? I'm only 30 or I'm only 32 or whatever I was when I started. So I've got plenty of time to try again, sort of thing. So you ask the what if question until you break it down to the end result. And I think in most cases when you do that, and Ben, you're going to take this exercise a bit further in a moment because it doesn't end there. You can add on top of that. But when you break it down, a lot of the time with a fear, not always, but a lot of the time, what's actually going to happen? So you're having that fear without actually thinking about what's going to happen if the thing you fear comes to pass, right? But when you actually do break it down to its base level, you will realize that that's actually not such a big deal, right? And it kind of just happens in your mind. You sit there going, okay, well, yeah, actually, I'm not going to be any worse off. And I mean, I've lost a little bit of time, but not much. And this is literally what's going to happen if a dropshipping business doesn't work out, right? Okay, so that's actually not really bad. So, is that really a barrier to you starting? And I think a lot of the time when you go through that, you realize it's not such a barrier to you starting, and you can, it makes it easier to then make that decision to go and do something.
All right. Before I take it a step further, what's interesting to me is how we never frame it the other way. Most people often don't frame it the other way. Like, I remember when I was beginning, I sat and thought about all the things that could go wrong, but I never once sat and thought about the things that could go right and how my life might change if it did work out, or if I did apply myself. And again, what you resist persists. And so if I'm only focusing on it not working over and over and over again, I'm going to convince myself that there's enough evidence there that it's not going to work and I'm not good enough or whatever. All right. So I wanted to ask you, when you brought this up before the call, we started talking about it and I said, have you heard of fear setting? And so I'm going to guess the audience, a lot of them hasn't heard of it either. So first off, if I butcher this, go to Google, type in TEDx fear setting, and you will find a TED talk from Tim Ferriss, who I think did a good job here. So I think the first exercise you did, I think that's in the 4-Hour Workweek. I believe it's built into that book where it has you go imagine the worst case scenario, and then you realize it's not that bad. Tim takes it a step further with fear setting. So number one, make a list of all the things that could go wrong if you take action on your idea, right? So what if I fail? What if I lose the money? What if my family, looks at me funny because they knew it wasn't going to work in the first place? What if my wife judges me differently? What if my friends say something? Any of the what ifs you can, write all of them out. Then define the steps to prevent all the things that could go wrong, right? So one of them might be I'm going to take a course on this that actually walks me through the steps rather than trying to wing this on my own. Or I'm going to hire somebody to do the Google ads that's very, very good at it so I can take that risk off the table, or whatever it means to you. Define the steps to prevent all the things that could go wrong. But the most important step to me is this third one. Define what your life would look like in the near future if you don't take any action. That's one of the most profound things that my coach has ever said to me. I would give him a what if statement. What if I fail? And he would say, what if it doesn't fail? Or what does it look like if you never took this action? That's almost scarier. If you try to think about your life further down the road and you never took any of the actions you should have taken, life's not going to be very fun. I guarantee no matter what age you're at listening to this, you have some regrets. You look back and you say, man, I wish I could go back and change this one thing. This is just yet another opportunity for you to analyze that and say, oh shit, this is going to be another one of those moments I look back and wish I took a chance on myself, wish I tried. And maybe it doesn't work. But as John just walked you through, step one there is going to walk you through what it looks like if it doesn't work. Step two is going to give you some ideas of how to prevent that. And somewhere in the middle, you're going to do John's part where you're like, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if I got here anyway. Because number one, I'm going to learn a lot of fucking skills. I'm going to learn a lot of things I didn't have before. But more importantly, what if I just don't take action at all? What does that mean? That means I'm right where I am or in a worse situation. And I'm going to have a lot of regrets later on in life. And so, I don't know, that's been profound to me, really looking at it in the opposite way. What is it? How do you shift it in reverse and say, what would life look like if I don't take any action?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when I started, it's a great question because I think it really, I think sometimes if you're at the right sort of place, when you ask that question, it really kind of flips it and makes taking the action into a you have no choice sort of scenario. So when I first started dropshipping, right, I was very much the motivator for me, as I've talked about on the podcast, was around getting more control over my time, being able to spend more time with my family, blah, 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 rather than say wealth or anything like that necessarily. So if I ask myself that question, what if I don't do this? My answer would have been, well, I'm going to be probably working the same job for the next 40 years, traveling a lot, never seeing my kids, They're going to grow up not seeing their dad very much, not spending any time, not having any time to do anything that they love to do with them, et cetera, et cetera. And they're probably going to end up where, me and my dad ended up, which is not having much of a relationship at all, because he was always away, right? I barely ever saw him, right? And frankly, we just don't get on very well. And I think that's a big part of that. And so if I thought about that, that's what's going to happen if I don't do something. Don't do this thing that I'm thinking of doing, which was going into business, starting a business, etc. Thinking about that, for me, pretty much flipped it into you have no choice, because that is such an abhorrent thought that is going to happen to me, that I have no choice than to start a business, because that thing, I am afraid of that way more than whatever fears I have around starting a business. And so I think you're right. I mean, for me, that sort of thought process was a very powerful one.
I think people it's too big. It's such this big, what if it doesn't work? That there's these repercussions around it that you can't, if you viewed it differently. There's a couple ways to view it differently. One is what if you just view this differently of I'm just going to go screw around and put this site up. Forget the money. $500, like you said, is not a lot to probably most people listening. To some it is, sure, but to most it's probably not. And so you lost $500. You could spend $500 going out to the bar one weekend, or going out to a couple nice dinners, or as soon as you minimize it in your head that it's not that big a deal, and I'm going to go screw around and see if this works, and then you make your first sale, and then whoa, now you're interested, and it kind of tugs you in, right? I don't know how to minimize it for people, but I would say really be careful of your language. I noticed when I started, I used a lot of absolutes. It's never going to work for me. What if I fail? It always goes this way for me. Start paying attention to your language and really ask yourself, is that true? Just again, question yourself. Awareness is step one. And if you can get some awareness on some of the thoughts in your head and just take 2 seconds to step back and be why did I just have that thought? You'll probably start laughing at yourself for having some of the thoughts you have, and realize that we're all just these monkeys who are still scared of saber-toothed tigers and wondering where our next meal is coming from, even though we're completely safe and food's abundant. And then you'll realize, I'm just making this stuff up to find something to be fearful of. And so, just kiss the girl, take action.